Hello everyone, it is I, Dark Symphony 777 with another fan fiction review. As always, links to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notifications, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts of the story, and finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that. So, the fan fiction I am doing is the first part of a three-part review of Project Genesis by Darkfire7881. It is a Command and Conquer fan fiction, and to cover, this part is going to cover part one, which is based off the original Command and Conquer, otherwise known as Command and Conquer Tiberium Dawn, as well as Command and Conquer Renegade, and also Command and Conquer Operation Final Justice, which is a reinterpretation of the events of Command and Conquer Generals. So, I bet you're wondering, what is Command and Conquer? Well, Command and Conquer is a series of real-time strategy games created by Westwood, which was a subsidiary of Electronic Arts in the early to mid 90s to early to mid 2000s. These games were really revolutionary for bringing about the popularity and the whole kit and caboodle of RTSs as a whole. Basically, if you play an RTS, it probably got some influence from Command and Conquer somewhere. It's that well regarded. Now, Command and Conquer is separated into two main stories, depending on, and each story has their fans. There is the Red Alert series, which actually focuses on a conflict between America and the Soviet Union. Usually, the Red Alert games take a more campy approach to the whole thing. Basically, both storylines have like a different approach to storytelling. Red Alert is very much the campy one. It's very over the top and very goofy, and as the story goes along, we get even more goofy, culminating in Red Alert 3, which contains arguably one of the greatest lines to ever grace video game history.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
See, that was very funny. The Tiberium series, on the other hand, is a very dark and disturbing, more morose storyline. So, what's the plot? Well, you're wondering, why am I talking about the plot of the game? Well, that's because Project Genesis is a novelization, sort of Tiberium Dawn. The reason I say sort of is due to Renegade, which is technically a canon game and does take place during the events of Tiberium Dawn, namely the latter half of Tiberium Dawn. But here's the thing. This is specifically supposed to be a novelization of Tiberium Dawn, which means Renegade really shouldn't fit in Project Genesis, but it kind of has to because it is canon and it does tie to a lot of key events in Tiberium Dawn. So hence why I'm saying it's kind of a novelization, but it's kind of not, because Renegade is like its own thing, and it's just the author kind of has to attach it to Tiberium Dawn because it takes place during Tiberium Dawn. But we're gonna do this, and then part 2 is going to be Tiberium Sun. Part 3 is going to be Tiberium Wars. I don't know about the Kane's Wrath expansion. This game does not exist. This game just simply does not exist. So, moving on. So now that we got all set up, what is the actual plot of Tiberium Dawn? Well, Tiberium Dawn takes place in 1995. Everyone is up in awe when a meteor comes crashing down into the Tiber River in Italy and is hit with a meteor. From the meteor comes these green crystals called Tiberium. Now, all Command and Conquer games have two storylines. Technically, there is the GDI story and the Nod story. And in Tiberium, well, usually because in Tiberium Wars we also have the Skirin, and they get their own campaign in that game. The weird thing about these games is usually the G in Tiberium Dawn and Tiberium Sun, GDI is the canon route. However, there's a lot of very weird, confusing aspects of it because according to Renegade, Renegade reveals that the Nod campaign up to a certain point, up to what's that guy's name? Seth. The events of the Nod campaign do happen until Seth's death.
Well done. You are truly becoming Kane's favorite. How would you like to ensure your place in the highest echelons of Nod? Surely you are ambitious enough to take on a mission of tremendous magnitude. Your goal is so secret, even Kane knows nothing of it yet. You see, power shifts quickly in the Brotherhood. I've taken the liberty of dispatching your troops to the U.S. Kane has been loath to attack America, but I feel that it's time, and that you're the one to do it. This is the Pentagon. A full frontal attack with your strongest forces should render their military center of operation.
Yes. Power shifts more quickly than some people think. I am Kane.
So everything up to that man's death happens. Now, Tiberium Sun, same thing, GDI happens in the base game. However, the expansion Firestorm, both GDI and Nod are, if I remember right, are implied to happen at the same time because of the story that happens. They kind of both have to be canon, or otherwise the story can't work. And then, of course, you have Tiberium Wars. All three campaigns actually are canon in that game, so all three campaigns do happen around at the same and occur at the same time, except for the Skirin. They kind of show up at the end, near the end of the game, and they kind of only they get like a tiny little campaign. That's mainly because like the foreman like is completely pissed over like everyone getting duped, and then he finds out the Kane's there. He's like, "Oh, you motherfucker! I'm gonna kill you! I'm gonna kill you!" And that's basically the story. Well, the storyline of the timeline and stuff like that. But with Dawn specifically, 1995. Going back to this, meteor crashes at the time into the area around the Tiber River in Italy. Compared, and out comes this green crystal called Tiberium. Now, depending on which of these two campaigns, GDI or Nod, you follow, they're gonna have a different explanation of why they call it Tiberium. And the GDI, they just call it Tiberium because it just crash landed near the Tiber River, Tiberium, Tiberium, potato potato. However, in the Nod campaign, I actually can't remember what did Kane say.
Where it was first discovered.
Discovered by the Brotherhood, that is, and I named it after Tiberius Drusus Caesar.
What did Kane call it? I'll probably come to me sooner. So, Tiberium starts sprouting out. It starts infecting everything: land, plant, animals, people. Basically, it's just terraforming the entire Earth. However, GDI are right on the scene. They basically the Global Defense Initiative, and they hire a man named Igneous. What the fuck was that guy's name? Ignacio Mobius, because I know this guy. I know they mentioned him here. As and a bunch of other leading scientists to try and deal with this. Now, usually they want like, oh, we want power, but then but Mobius and all the scientists realize this stuff's way too dangerous to kind of mess around with. So we're just gonna focus on trying to get rid of it. Consequently, the Brotherhood of Nod find another a piece of the meteor breaks off in South America. The Nod actually get their hands on that one, and they start spreading Tiberium around the world, to Africa, to Australia, to China, and everywhere. anywhere and everywhere, including America. And this causes them to come into conflict with GDI because GDI realizes how dangerous Tiberium is, with it slowly leaching soil, with infecting plants and animals, and if people touch it, they actually start getting Tiberium growths all over their body, and they eventually die. It's very, very harmful, and they realize Nod is deliberately spreading this stuff. So we get a massive, gigantic war over the supply of these resources, with Nod wanting to spread it and GDI wanting to contain it. That's more or less the plot of Tiberium Dawn. Renegade, I honestly don't know because I can't play Renegade. I actually do own the entire franchise on Steam. But I can't play Renegade because I thought I legitimately suck with playing with a keyboard. I can't play with a keyboard to save my life. So I even tried doing like the whole remap control for like controllers, and I couldn't get it with Renegade for some reason. It just wasn't working. But apparently, Renegade stars a guy named Havoc, who is a commando, who is actually a very fan favorite character of the Command and Conquer franchise. And his mission to kind of sneak into various not territories to find Ignacio Mobius, his and his daughter Sydney, and try and just rescue them. That's basically, I don't know the full details of that because it's I wish I could play it. I can't. This is not like Generals where I literally can't play the game because the game won't load, or Tiberian Twilight, which the game won't load. Again, we're not talking about Tiberian. We're not talking about Tiberian Twilight. That game doesn't exist, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, and that's more or less the plot. I can't really tell you much about the plot of Renegade. That's it. But okay, so consequently, going back to to Project Genesis, the plot of Genesis more or less follows more closely to the plot of GDI. It doesn't really start at the beginning of the stories because they kind of start at the beginning of their respective campaigns. GDI within Europe and Nod in Africa. Instead, it kind of starts a little bit into each campaigns, and we follow two characters. We follow Mark Lancaster, who represents the playable character in GGI. I believe it's actually supposed to be Solomon. Got the lead, who becomes the leader of GDI in Tiberium Sun, who's supposed to be the playable character in Dawn. But Solomon is there in this story. He is involved because because the author kind of needs him to be part of GDI to get the position to get where he is in the sequel. The big part of why he made Project Genesis is because he wanted a full on story revamp to try and connect all three games together more coherently. So as you know, all three of the Tiberian games were actually done by different writing crews, so they all have very, very vastly different plot points. So that's why he's trying to do this like this. He's just trying to say, I can make all three games work as one cohesive story. But going back to, I'm getting off topic. Going back to the characters. You have Mark Lancaster representing GDI. You have Gabriel Artelos, who represents the not playable character, and the various moves they're constantly made throughout their campaign. Along the way, part way through the story, we get to meet Havoc and we get the various renegade missions. I don't have to talk about him that much because he's kind of a cool. He's kind of a generic badass. He works. He's fine. Uh, how they work in the story is pretty fine. They basically work as the commanders. They basically move all the troops around. They're meant to represent the playable commanders who are basically supposed to command the troops, i.e., command and conquer. On the ground, you have Robert McCoy, who's basically a normal foot soldier who just joined GDI and he's getting his first taste of war in on the GDI side, and his trials and tribulations of trying to witnessing witnessing the horrors of war from someone who's never been to war anymore. And on the other side, you have Higgs, who is actually a mercenary for hire, who basically just got paid a bunch of money to work for Nod and help out in certain missions, and him kind of getting a connection to like a couple other members of Nod, as well as just trying to find something to do, and he's just in it for the money. He does eventually get like a connection with some of the other members. That's really it. How they work in the plot, it's just a simple that okay. This is honestly the hard part of why I think he needed to incorporate Renegade, because with novelizations you need to try and you need to play by the stories of the strengths itself. Tiberium Dawn doesn't really have a story. It barely has a story. It's just like meteor lands, spreads crystal, two factions fighting for the crystal for various reasons. That's it. It doesn't really have any deep interconnected plots. It doesn't have anything too sophisticated. What you see, it's literally just war. So I can see why he needed to incorporate Renegade. Besides the fact Renegade is canon, because it does happen. Uh, but having the sections kind of be incorporated into like a command section with like Mark Lancaster and Gabriel, and then a conquer section, which is the bulk of each chapter, with Robert and Higgs and their trials and tribulations of their character growth and how they interact with war. With Robert getting like slowly becoming like completely like numb and eventually getting PTSD, and then Higgs like he's getting like a thrill and a high from it because he's like a lone wolf. But then he eventually just kind of he actually willingly joins Nod at the end. He joins the Block Hand at the end, as revealed by in Operation Final Justice. He eventually reveals it works with Black Hand, and then he eventually trains Anton Slavik, and basically, he's Higgs working for the Black Hand. Just basically is meant to set up Sun. Sun. So this story is very, very character driven. It's very, very driven by the characters, and this is where I would have to have my one and only big problem with this story happen. I have no idea what any of these characters look like. Sure, you can say like, oh well, yeah, because it's supposed to mimic the game. Yes, but here's the thing: these are all OCs. Robert's OC. Steve, another character we're going to introduce in the GDI story, is an OC. Mark is an OC. Gabriel's an OC, because in Dawn and Wars, we're just generic faceless commanders. In Tiberium Son, we actually see what the commanders look like, which are, I think, I can't remember the guy's full name, McNeil and Anton Slavik. We know what they look like. We know what Kane looks like. We know what Solomon looks like. We kind of know what Hassan looks like, a character that's introduced in Operation Final Justice. But we don't know what Higgs looks like. We don't know what McRoy looks like. We don't know what Lancaster looks like, or Gabriel. We don't know what any of these characters look like. It's such a weird decision to not put descriptions for any of the characters. Now I understand like putting characters for like name characters or just minor characters. Fine, I can deal with them not having descriptions, like not having designs, or even like Kane, because everyone kind of knows what Kane looks like. You literally just look at Joseph Kukan's face and you just like, oh, that's Kane right there. But having no descriptions for any of the bigger characters is such a weirdly bad decision. like I understand why he needed to do this because it's supposed to represent the gameplay because he's just a random foot soldier because McRoy is just a random foot soldier just kind of being commanded by Lancaster, for example, or Higgs just being commanded by Gabriel. But it goes a long lot to going forward of caring more deeply about these characters if we know what they look like so people who like, especially when they like readers who visualize everything, you can't visualize the story, which makes it even tougher, like because you can't tell how the character's supposed to react, like you picture their facial expressions, their body language and stuff like that. You can't do that with none of the characters have a description. And so when I'm reading through this, I'm just mentally drawing a blank and just getting like generic characters, just or hell, I just picture them all as like Halo soldiers, kind of just bobbing their heads like in Reverse Blue. Uh, they all do have neat character moments. The name characters do like a lot of name characters do die. I think like what was the name? Carter in game. Carter is like either like a foot commander. He's basically like the commander's eyes and ears on the ground. In game, he does eventually die, but he apparently dies by like sacrifice, where he's gonna distract the obelisk of light, which is like this big tower that fires lasers. And so I'm gonna distract him so you can take him out, so you can take it out, and he kind of sacrifices himself that way. In this story, he has a boat. He's gonna sneak up on the boat, and a bunch of orcas are like, they see the obelisk and they're like completely confused over what it's supposed to be. It's like, oh, it's probably like a religious symbol. It's like, it's not. They're religious fanatics. They would do something like this. And then when the boat gets near, they hear the laser. It's like, do you hear that? And then of course it fires, it kills Carter, and then go. Different death. Death still happens, but different. But how it happens is different. You have Morelos. You have Gabriel's helper. You have Higgs' comrade. You have Steve. There's a lot of characters, and they're all really interesting. Like you have like going back like specifically McRoy, because I think McRoy was a really well done character of someone who wanted to make a difference, who wanted to be like a soldier. Is like he wants to make his family proud and protect them, and then he slowly, like his mind erodes over the course of the story as he's witnessing all these horrors, and especially like the Tiberian sickness of like, especially when Nod starts weaponizing Tiberium and they start melting it down and they touch it, and then whenever touch it, it just melts like the flesh off their bones. It's actually really like the mental image is like really horrifying, and like McRoy actually gets like post traumatic stress disorder from that, and he gets it, and he still has it by the time Final Justin happens. And it's like fueling his decisions, and like he's just trying to survive, and he's like, and he's still just trying to like stay in there thanks to Steve helping him out, like keeping him in mind, and even having like a flashback at the end. Like honestly, this story has a lot of these touches. Like at the end where Steve, he introduces Robert to the family, and he's like he opens up the grill with steak, and Robert, he smells it, and then he immediately gets flashback into the trenches and stuff like that. An actual PTSD episode. Nice touch, incorporating like various uh all of the like the tactics and stuff like that of like actual warfare and stuff like that. Espionage and all that. You have the renegade chapters, which are more stealth based than anything else. I think I have honestly my favorite touch is actually at the end, where the author had the sheer brass balls to actually reference the fucking AI in the game. For context, at the end of the game, the final chapter of the game, where they're sieging Kane's ultimate base, there's a bunch of power plants to the side powering a ring of obelisk around. That's basically preventing them from getting anywhere near Kane's base. They shut. They sent a troop with Robert and Steve to shut down the power plants. They successfully shut them down. The obelisk alight, they're shut down. They start approaching. They start just bomb rushing, basically doing tank spam. The good old fashioned tank spam. Tank spam. Nobody will take that. And as they're approaching, as they're crossing the obelisk, like they start hearing a hum, and and everyone just starts getting confused. Like, wait a minute, we turn off the power. What? Huh? Huh? It's like, Morelli, what's going on? I don't know. Which is a reference to the fucking AI somehow always having a way to easily power on the obelisk light because unlike your playable character in the game who need to wait time and space to set up to set up like power plants stuff like no, the AI can just immediately do it, and it's supposed to reference that. That is fucking ballsy. Also, kind of hilarious that this was like the justification, like we need the ion cannon. I gotcha. And I like it. It's like, and then you have Final Justice, which is meant to act as a bridge between Tiberium Dawn and Tiberium Sun. And it has a lot of key elements. Like it still follows Lancaster and McCoy, but on the Nod side, it actually follows a character named Hassan, who and his journey of like taking over Nod and trying to help. Like eventually, he becomes a puppet to GDI because he doesn't want Nod to keep dying because so many of the Brotherhood of Nod dies. He takes like he takes like a devil's deal because he's like, no more fighting, no more of this. I need to at least let them rebuild and all that. And he takes the devil's deal. But with Robert's side, they had to go to another campaign in the Middle East that involves a general from Nod that escaped during the Tiberian War, and they had to try and deal with him. And they eventually do when Eunice goes like too far and he steals like a nuke and he tries to launch a nuke. McRoy actually sacrifices himself to try and get the coordinates for the iron cannon tracker close to the rocket so that way they can actually hit the dang thing. So and eventually it's basically just that. And I think the plots are fine enough. And I haven't even touched on the Renegade stuff, but I'm not going to talk about the Renegade stuff because I don't know enough about Renegade to kind of justify that. I will say the fights are kind of boring because there's only so much. Not only does the like not knowing what the characters look like make things very very hard for me to read through because I can't because I can if you're I can't I just can't visualize their faces because I don't know what they look like. But there's also the fact a lot of the fights are just very generic. I'm not gonna criticize the fights as a whole or wish they should be gone because that's gonna be because oh boy, a war fic about war featuring war stories, and I'm complaining about war fight like massive war sieges and fights and a war fic. Oh, the humanity! I gotta be incredibly counterproductive. I do think these stories are fine, and but the characters really do carry these two stories. I liked all the characters. I think they're all fine. Grammar, there were a couple grammar errors here or there. Pacing, it was paced very perfectly. It's very, very well crafted. There's a lot of technical aspects. Like there's a lot of wink and nods to the game. Another neat detail is, they use like actual military military designations for like vehicles and stuff like that. But but the Nods call them like their nicknames for their craft. There's a nice touch. And there's even like a horror aspect where Morelli take like a small squad into like a lab and they have to try and find like evidence and destroy it and stuff like that. I think that's a nice chapter. Uh, Going back to the pacing, I think the pacing's good. I think the sentence structure is good. I think all the nice touches of people who know the games would know like certain aspects and stuff like that. Consider the fact, Project Genesis is meant to be like a double thing where anyone who didn't know about Tiberium Dawn or the Tiberian series can easily find their way and find out a lot about the games and the story through this because it's deliberately meant to be very friendly toward people who don't know the franchise, but also having enough winks and nods that people who played the games and kind of know the story can go, hey, yeah, I know that. I know that. That's neat. That's cool. It's it's very friendly to both last fans, hardcore fans, people who never heard of the game, even casual fans. There's a lot to love about the story. I'm not a fan of. There's not really a lot that I like. I also don't like. Also, frankly, I don't like the fact that Kane's not really involved in the story. I get that. I get it. He's not really meant to be involved in Tiberian Dawn. He becomes more important in Sun and Wars because he's supposed to be more because of the whole addition to like the Tacitus and stuff like that. Uh, but I honestly think he should have been more involved in the story. I get why he couldn't, but considering like how important Kane is to the story, because the entire Tiberium Dawn, the entire Tiberium timeline, basically revolves around the guy. Yeah. But ignoring that, would I recommend the story? Yeah, I would recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone because honestly, this is a novelization of a game that not everyone will like. So I say if you want to get into Command and Conquer, go read this story. If you're a hardcore fan of Command and Conquer, go read the story. It's worth your time. But if you're not interested in this type of story, I can easily see people like to take one look at it, realize, it's a novelization like a very obscure of like a game that doesn't really offer a lot in terms of a deep plot because a lot of people really like novelizations where you have a more detailed plot. They might skip this one. I can understand why they skip it, but I still, I wouldn't be mad if they like skip it. But there is a lot to like about the story. I do think it's good enough on its own, as well as the first act of type of the Project Genesis of the 5-part thing. If you notice, I didn't really talk much about Operation Final Justice, mainly because it's like a more interequal that won't add anything. It doesn't really add anything on the GDI. It's basically like an interequal that's meant to bridge two different games, and you just want to add generals instead of like a one off game, and it doesn't really do anything worth talking about besides Hassan getting like control of Nod, and that plays more into Sun at the beginning. Um, yeah, I think it's. I think. I think it's good. My favorite part, honestly, is honestly McRoy's character. No, it has to be the science section with Morelli. Having an Orca pilot, which is like an Air Force thing in this universe, and kind of stuck her in the ground and kind of have her go underground, and like it's the tenseness, especially when they introduce to the chem soldiers and they kind of just it's like it's all quiet, and then they see these chem soldiers kind of just casually walk up, and they have the tanks like Tiberium, and then they spray them. Two guys get hit, and you see and the writing for them has their flesh falls off their bones, and they just melt. It's terrifying, and and the Morelli just justifiably freaks out, like blast them, and they just basically just overkill the two guys because they're just that terrified. It's like that's a nice detail. That's nice touch. What would I fix with the story? With the fights, I wouldn't change anything. With Kane, maybe add another appearance or two because of how important he is. But that's not really mandatory because again, he's not really important in Dawn. He's more important in Sun and Wars. If it doesn't show up that much in Wars and Sun, all right, then we're gonna have a problem. Now we're gonna throw fit. Now we're gonna throw hands. But I would say if there's one thing to add to the story, add descriptions for the characters. I don't care what they look like. Just add any sort of descriptions to every big name character. Lancaster, McRoy, Steve, Higgs in the group, Gabriel, the Gabriel's aide, even Kane, because Kane is like important enough that he despite barely appearing, he kind of needs a description. Again, you could just look up Joe Kukan. Solomon, they need descriptions, but that's really it. So that is my review of Project Genesis Part 1. I'll see you next time when I do the second part of Project Genesis, which is going to cover Tiberian Sun as well as the Firestorm expansion. This has been Dark Symphony 777, and cut.